Okay, Jeff, take it away.
Okay, I'm Jeff Oster, Master Gardener since 2016. My career was in agriculture and plant pathology, uh, plant diseases specifically. So it's a topic that interests me, but it's also diagnosing plant problems can be kind of complicated. And not everybody wants the headache of trying to figure it out. I'll try to make it as easy as possible. So, officially, people who work in this area have a certain diagnostic procedure. So I'm going to go through what is involved in a diagnostic procedure. This may not be something that sticks with you for a long period of time, but toward the end of the talk, we have a simplification. So hang in there. Next, I'll have examples of problems in our area, so you may recognize them. And if you do, you can just type the problem in a search engine and come up with solutions to your problems without me saying a great deal about them because we don't have that much time. So there's really no need for Tylenol because by the end of the presentations, all headaches will disappear. And what is helping them disappear is UC IPM's Plant Problem Diagnostic Tool. It's an online tool, and it can guide you through the whole process, which is why you don't necessarily need to remember every diagnostic step, but develop an appreciation for them. And then following that, if that tool fails, is the alternative bailout simple diagnostic procedure. So let's get started with that. So what is diagnosis? You sort of have to know what it is in order to use it. And this is kind of technical, a methodical process of determining the nature or cause of a diseased or disordered condition. Okay, well, what the heck is a disease condition? So break the word apart. It often helps. Dis means not, and ease means everything's okay. So everything's not okay with the plant. So it's a condition that impairs the normal functioning and manifests signs and symptoms that are not found in a normal or non-disease plant. So stepping through the process, one thing is to keep an open mind. Don't make assumptions about what you're seeing. Gather information. If it may be wherever the plant was formed, is it from your garden? Is it present throughout your garden? Make those observations. Describe the environment. So is it just this plant? Is it other plants? What's the weather been like lately? So you make observations surrounding the problem plant. And this you may not be able to do, but normally a lab confirmation may be necessary because you have higher magnification than other tools. Don't expect you to be using that. Pull your information together and make a tentative diagnosis. And then confirm the diagnosis, either by looking at other sources on the internet, asking an expert, a nursery person, or that type of thing. So you may be more confident if you approach it from more than one direction, you can be more confident that you have made the correct diagnosis. So first, a couple of concepts and principles about biotic, that is diseases caused by living organisms living on another organism. Here is the disease pyramid. So it describes you have to have a susceptible host to have the disease. You have to have a virulent pathogen, in other words, a pathogen capable of causing disease, and the environment has to predisposing. Some diseases, for example, may be present under low temperature conditions, but not high. And of course, everything occurs over time. If the disease occurs rapidly and progresses rapidly, you got to do something right away. If it's slow, it may give you some time to figure out what the heck is going on. So the relative influence of these four factors may determine what control strategy you take. So under gather information, identify the plant. This is number one, because if you have the scientific name, and plants have common names, so some people may use several different common names for a plant. But if you have the scientific name, that is the genus and species, You can get access to all kinds of information, a host list of pathogens, basic information about the plant, how it should be grown, common problems with that plant, and very importantly is what's normal for healthy plants. How do they look? Is this a disease or is just the plant being the plant? So make observations, inspect the entire plant. And maybe if it is a garden plant, you have several plants of the same kind, inspect a range of plants, inspect their roots, pull one of them up if you can. You may need a microscope or hand lens. Magnifying glass is sometimes quite useful, but don't form any conclusions at this point. On the plant, identify the symptoms. That is, when the disease-causing agent interacts with the plant, it produces certain characteristic appearance on the plant. Do you have the plant progressing, over time? Maybe the lower leaves are more severely affected, the younger ones less severely affected. Is there more than one problem present, say from plant to plant or within a plant? And look for patterns on the plant. Younger foliage is affected, older foliage is affected, and so on. We'll give some examples of those. And identify pathogen signs if present. So symptoms are the interaction between the disease-causing agent and the plant. And signs are actually, in the case of biotic or living organism-caused diseases, it actually may crawl out. Little mycelia or the fungal threads of a fungus may crawl out, or it may be mushrooms, or it may be something else. Those are actually the pathogen or the disease-causing agent itself, apart from the symptoms, and compare to a healthy plant. So your environment is also, this is another leg of our disease pyramid. Identify the environment. So what cultural practices and history, what's been going on with the plant? How have you treated? When have you applied pesticides? When have you applied fertilizer? And so on and so forth. And keep in mind that improper irrigation is one of the most common problems causing disease in your garden. So what are the environmental conditions in the plant area? What are environmental conditions over time? This may be a pattern in the field. Spatial, it occurs just here, it occurs over my entire garden, or temporal. In other words, okay, we had a frost last week, things are dying this week and the tips are most severely affected. Frost, that's a pattern over time. And is it uniform or localized? Pathogens tend to occur in patches, where herbicide damage and things like that tend to occur over a wider area. Depends on where it's applied. Here are some useful resources. Abiotic disorders, in other words, disorders caused by non-living things of landscape plants. So it's a diagnostic tool. And pests of landscape trees and shrubs. Those are quite useful if you have a lot of problems in your landscape, or you just love finding out about it. Those are two good resources. And you may want a soil or plant tissue test. This is often not useful because it's hard to interpret the results of these tests and they cost something. But if you have a widespread problem in your garden, a lot of plants are looking sick. They don't look healthy, and it's across your garden. A soil test may be useful in finding out if you have a nutritional or soil-related problem. Pull the information together and list likely causes. It may be more than one at first and you can't decide. So test your conclusion by looking at other sources on the internet. The University of California is one resource, gardening magazines, find out which ones are good ones. There's an SF guide, that's a good resource, and there's several others. Or seek expert assistance. So nursery folks, where you got the plant from, so most of the time they're familiar with diseases and problems in your area, or call or email the hotline. So next, maybe you'd like to see what I'm actually talking about. So here's a rogues gallery of suspects that cause problems in the garden. They sometimes seem like supernatural forces, but they can be managed. So A lot of this information is useful to give you an exposure to the range of things that could go wrong in the garden, but have patience and we'll find at the end, we'll go through the things that will guide you through the process in finding out what's wrong with your plants. So they're biotic, caused by living organisms, those diseases, and abiotic, caused by non-living things. So pathogenic, things that actually cause symptoms in plants, and they may be bacterial, viral, fungal, nematode are the most common ones. Insects may be a problem in your garden. So which insect it is depends on how they feed and their life cycle. And macroorganisms, in other words, all those pesky things that are really ugly in your landscape, like gopher holes, moles, deer eating your plants. And abiotic, just a physical environment like frost or heat or that sort of thing may cause symptoms. Chemical from sprays or other application of materials in your garden, maybe even excess fertilizer, or mechanical like string trimmer blight. You got too close to your tree with your string trimmer and peeled off the bark. So let's try a few fungal diseases and see what they look like. So it gives you a clue of whether you have a fungal problem or not. So there's the symptoms generally are circular or irregular lesions or spots, sometimes concentric lesions, one spot within a spot. The roots may be discolored, kind of blackish or brownish, soft, and rotting. You pull on them and the whole thing comes away except for a little strand in the middle. Signs would be mycelium or fungal threads, little kind of cottony or soft. Fruiting bodies like mushrooms, and spores that are like fungal seeds. So here we have damping off. This occurs early in the life cycle of a plant. Right here you see the stem is very narrow and kind of dried up. And you see this occurs at the soil line. It's caused by fungi of various kinds, and eventually it results in something ugly like this. You lost your entire plant. Powdery mildew is very common in a lot of different plants. So here, symptoms. Yellow patch, yellow patch, green patch. That is a symptom. It's kind of a mottled appearance. But you see this white stuff, that's the fungus coming out of the leaf. That is a sign. It's the actual pathogen, the fungus itself. And it could be found in grapes, it can be found on roses, zucchini, and in this particular grape leaf, rose up here, grape leaf down here, you find little brown spots. That's actually the reproductive body of the fungus. It carries over from one year to another by producing those little brown specks. You see some here, and pea. Peach leaf curl, most of you probably wish you had never seen, but probably have. The fungus causes distortions in the leaf growth. So these are symptoms. There are no signs. We can't see the fungus here. And it occurs usually on the younger leaves. If you grow carrots, sometimes you may see leaf spots, and remember spots and the fungus. You may not see the fungus itself, so these are symptoms. Onion smut. Now here's a case where on these leaves here, there may be these little brown spots. Look, these have little hairs coming out of them. This is where the fungus produces spores or fungal seeds, depending on the way you want to look at it. And that is a sign. This is a symptom for the most part, although you may be able to, looking closer, you may be able to see signs of the fungus. Blackleg of brassicas. This is the reproductive structure. It's sort of like a fruit in vegetables, and it's oozing out seeds. So that is a sign. Armillaria root rot, another very common thing in our area. There may be bleeding on the lower trunk, cracking of the bark when the bark actually dies back. Those are symptoms, and the signs, mushrooms. And when you peel the bark back, more signs. These are the mycelia, or the cottony threads of the fungus itself, and the ultimate result, a dead tree. So there are bacterial diseases in our area. They are not as common. We don't have the humidity. We don't have the free water on the plants during the growing season, usually. Symptoms, angular lesions. In other words, the veins box in a diseased area, and it looks not round, but angular. Water soaked. There may be a soft rot or odor, which most people found unpleasant, and it may form galls. Signs are bacterial ooze, or the bacterium itself suspended in some kind of liquid coming out of plant tissue. So here are angular lesions between the veins. This is a bacterial disease of cucurbits. Fire blight, it's so called because it looks like somebody took a torch to the affected parts of your tree. This is a early formation fruit, which will never mature because the bacterium has colonized it. Here's bacterial ooze coming out of the wound. So that is a sign. This is a symptom. And these diseases have common names, like fire blight is descriptive. It says what the disease looks like, but it's caused by Erwinia amylavera. That's the scientific name of the pathogen or the bacterium. And crown gall, these are the symptoms. It causes the plant to lose control over its growth. It forms enlarged outgrowths, either from the stem or on the crown of the plant near the roots. Olive knot, which is found on oleander quite frequently, or olive, of course, has these overgrowths on the branches and sometimes on the trunk. Viral diseases, symptoms, usually there's no dead or necrotic tissue, but there are chlorotic or yellow patterns on the leaves. They may be rings, it may be a mosaic, looks somewhat like a checkerboard, yellow, green, yellow, green, yellow, green. It may be between veins or on the veins, stunting, and distortions. There are no signs the viruses are too small to see. So mosaic, green islands, yellow islands, mosaic pattern. Necrotic or dead spots on your leaf, general yellowing of the leaf sometimes. There may be stripes on the leaf, or along the veins, there may be no chlorophyll, or between the veins, there may be no chlorophyll, and leaf rolling or curling. Those are leaf symptoms, but there are also fruit symptoms sometimes, and you may have seen some of these, especially in tomato. So there may be stunting. Some fruit are smaller than others. Maybe a mosaic pattern, yellow patch, green patch, yellow patch, green patch, or lack of pigmentation altogether. There may be distortions. You see there are bumps on the zucchini. Doesn't look right. Or ring spot patterns where they're somewhat yellow compared to the normal red color of the tomato, or even on plums. Nematode diseases are found in our area, but they're below ground. They're a little bit easier to see. You only see the symptoms. The worm that causes the problem is underground. So it looks like moisture or nutrient stress. It looks like stunting. It looks like galls on the roots, and sometimes above ground parts, but usually below ground. Signs would be cysts. The cyst is actually a female nematode full of eggs sticking out from the roots. So here's nematodes are very small, almost microscopic, round worms. They're not segmented. Root knots, see all these little bumps, those are the knots on the roots. They consist of largely these cysts. And here is the female. She had originally stuck her mouth in the plant and was feeding there. And she developed her eggs, which are inside this cyst. So that's how the disease, the worm reproduces. Insect damage on plants. It's very helpful to know whether you have a chewing insect, and you can tell by symptoms if you do, sucking insects or rasping insects. So insects that chew grasshoppers, caterpillars, beetles, there may be holes or notches in the foliage. The leaf may be skeletonized, only the veins are left. And in some cases, the leaves fall off the plant after they are killed by the insect. Some, like a cutworm, cuts the plants off at the soil surface. This little worm lives underground during the day and comes out at night. They may consume roots or bore or tunnel into tissue. Insects with sucking mouth parts like aphids, scales, leafhoppers, whiteflies, and so on and so forth feed on the sap. They put their mouth parts into the plant, and therefore they produce kind of a tiny little affected area where the cells die or turn yellow. Causes spotting or stippling, very fine spotting or stippling, leaf curling, and even misshapen fruit. Insects with rasping mouth parts scrape the surface of the plant. So here are some examples. Caterpillars, you see the notching of the leaf. Japanese beetles, they eat between the veins generally, so they skeletonize the leaf. The citrus leaf miner, and you may have seen this on your citrus last year, is very common, in tunnels between the upper and lower surfaces of the leaf, and produces leaves behind a tunnel. So the larva, the immature form of the leaf miner, which is a fly, can be found at the end of the tunnel. Cutworm lives beneath the soil surface. Here's the cutworm, and just chops your plants off. Nasty little rascal. If you have trees, especially conifers of some sort, you may have bark beetles. They tunnel into the bark and make little tunnels under the bark. And what's left behind as the larva goes down the tube, it leaves insect poop behind. So you'll see frass or insect poop. Peach tree borer goes into the peach. You maybe see resin exuded by the tree. It's trying to turn the tree borer into a amber enclosed fossil. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, depending on the number of borers. Sucking insects. Leafhopper damage. The leafhopper has probing mouth parts that produces the little really fine dots on your leaf if there are a lot of leafhoppers. Spider mites may produce something that looks somewhat similar. You may see little webbing, very fine webbing on the leaves if it's a spider mite. Scales, they also suck the plant's juices. And you've probably seen this as well. Aphids feeding on plum causes the leaves to distort and curl. So, for example, here are aphids. They suck juices from the plant. An aphid mummy indicates there's a wasp around that has parasitized this aphid and killed it. They can be useful. You don't want to just get rid of these type of natural enemies. Spider mites, two-spotted spider mite here with the egg, and whiteflies, which most people know what they look like. They're mostly on the undersurface of the leaf. So always look at the undersurface of the leaf. Rasping mouth parts. No, so here's a thrip, typical of this type of thing. It has fringed wings. Doesn't have veins and solid wings with little lines running through them. It's just these little strands coming out from the leaves. You can tell a thrip that way. Here's general scale of the thrip. Here's a citrus blossom, and the thrips are about that large. They scrape the surface of the leaf with their mouth parts. They leave behind kind of a tarry black poof. Another indication, there's a thrip right there. And on flowers, it looks like somebody just went and sandpapered your flower, and it may cause flower distortions. So in addition to feeding, insects may lay eggs on your plants, oviposition damage, and it can affect the stem dieback, may cause distorted or misshapen fruit, and it may cause gall formation. Here are some examples. Viburnum leaf beetle. The beetle laid eggs all these different sites, and it affected the bark adversely. There's a wasp on oak that causes galls. That's what these are, or oak apples, as some people like to say. The fruit fly on loquat, it may produce what's called cat facing, or kind of dark corky areas on the fruit. And here another type of galls on oak caused by a wasp. Causes the plant to produce certain hormones that causes abnormal growth. And perhaps the most damaging things that insects can do on your plants is to transmit plant pathogens or disease-causing organisms. Some insects are associated with certain kinds of plant disease. There's greater economic damage than insects alone, and most are caused, most of these type of transmitted diseases are caused by viruses, but there are other causes as well. So here's cucumber mosaic virus. Remember, a patchy pattern on it, transmitted by aphids. So another reason you don't want aphids is they transmit diseases. Fire blight, is spread around by water splashing on open flowers, and also by bees or other insects taking the bacterium, fire blights caused by a bacterium, from one flower to the other. And here's the reason why it's called fire blight. The affected tissues look black. It can spread down the stem. Tomato spotted wilt virus. So the plant actually looks like it's suffering from water loss. It has these types of symptoms on its fruit, some ring spotting and discoloration, and peony ring spot virus transmitted by nematodes. This is thrips. These are nematodes that transmit the viruses. And then there are macroorganisms, a fancy name for all the things you can see that are really annoying in your garden, like moles, gophers, squirrels, raccoons, rabbits, deer, and even the bird who's protesting, who, me? And we all know it really is you. So here's California squirrel burrow. There's not a lot of dirt piled up around the edges. Usually it's of a certain size. Some of those can be a little larger. Mole mound, which is circular. Gopher mound, which tends to be crescent shaped. There's a little indentation in one side. You can tell a mole from the gopher that way. And voles, which are like mice. They have a nice circular opening, and they're runways. They have very shallow burrows, and they run from one to another and actually leave trails. So yeah, it's not an earthquake, it's a mole. So they tunnel near the surface, and you may find this mounding in areas you didn't really like to see it. Let's go from biotic to abiotic disorders. And there are some examples, just pictures. Salt damage, the edge of the leaf tends to die back. Ozone, which we don't have too much trouble in our area, produces kind of a dying across the leaf's surface where stomates are. Those are pores in the leaf that allow gas to come in. Ozone's a gas, so that's how that happens. Nitrogen deficiency and drought. So let's look at nutritional problems under abiotic disorders. There are different types of nutrients. Some are mobile in the plant. In other words, if your plant doesn't have enough nutrients, it will take from the older growth to give to the new growth. These nutrients migrate within the plant: nitrogen, potassium here, phosphorus, and magnesium. And there are immobile ones. The older leaves don't want to give it up. They keep those nutrients, and the younger ones look sick. Iron, manganese, copper, molybdenum, and zinc. These nutrients, a lot of them are influenced by pH, especially iron and zinc. Under a high pH, these compounds become unavailable. They precipitate out, they fall out of solution, the plant can't get them. So nutrients can be either deficient or toxic if there's too much of them. So nitrogen deficiency, the yellowing, phosphorus deficiency, stunting and dark green, or even a purplish cast on some of your leaves. Zinc, necrotic spotting, it may actually stunt your plants. And iron deficiency, there is yellowing between the veins, interveinal chlorosis, as they say. Environmental disorders, too much or too little of any of these: sunlight, temperature, wind, and water. So water is one of the most prevalent things in the garden, one thing that you kind of can control to a certain extent, that causes a lot of problems. And it may look like other problems like nutrient deficiency. So a plant is not well watered, it can't take nutrients up. If a plant is not well watered, it'll be susceptible to sunburn, and so on and so forth. So frost damage is too cold, too little temperature. Frequently if you don't want to produce new growth on your plant late in the season, because frost will hit that selectively. Another case of frost damage on citrus, and winter damage to camellia. This is pretty common around town. The leaves kind of brown off. They may die, they may not, may defoliate, and grapes. So too much light, too much heat can result in heat stress or sunburn. Here's sunburn. Maybe the tree was pruned and sun hits the branch directly, kills the outer bark, and eventually the bark will crack and peel off. And for citrus, maybe too much sunburn or heat stress. Here, this part of the leaf, the chlorophyll's gone. It was essentially burned out. Or perhaps just another case of heat stress on maples, especially Japanese maples, which have a very thin bark and are susceptible to sunburning. In another case of wind, too much wind, not enough water, leaf edge dies. Too much wind, especially after rain, when the plant takes up a lot of water, limb falls. And even in the case where not enough water, plenty of wind, the leaves fall off. So drought stress, too little water. Wilting, curling of leaf edges. It almost looks like salt damage sometimes because there's not enough water to keep the leaf in good balance with its nutrients. Flagging or dead branch tips, especially redwoods. That's common around here, especially under the drought conditions we've had. For citrus, sometimes you see in the younger leaves not enough nutrients, and grasses. Here's a high area in this field. It didn't get as much water as some of the adjacent areas. The plants die back and they just don't make it. Too much water, so too much or too little, equally bad. Water standing on a low area, perhaps the plants die back. If you took a core out of an affected area, the one that looked kind of thin, looked kind of brown, you'll often find a black area here. This is where the soil went anaerobic. There's not oxygen in the soil. It smells like a sewer. The roots don't like it, plant dies. In some cases, plants show nutrient deficiencies because they cannot take up nutrients because there's not enough oxygen to power the plant's uptake system. And it looks similar to too little water sometimes, especially the wilting of I think this is a prayer plant here. You do that with too much water and there may be rotting where the water accumulates in the leaves right here and causes rot. There may be pathogens in the soil that take advantage of that condition. So here's the pain relief part. Hopefully you're still with me and your headache will now be taken care of, at least in part. So choose the appropriate tool. UC, University of California, IPM, Integrated Pest Management, has a plant problem diagnostic tool, which identifies your plant. Remember, identifying the plant is the first thing you want to do. Identifies pests and diseases, and more importantly, it'll be linked to a nice information sheet that has recommendations, how to manage the disease, how to grow the crop, and solutions if you have a problem. It's this website, but you can just type this in and it'll get you there. And there's an alternative, simple diagnostic procedure, simple because you only have to enter a couple things initially. This is especially if the diagnostic tool does not work. This is a relatively new tool. It doesn't necessarily contain all information. So here you also have to identify the plant, most important. So type UC followed by the name of the plant, add IPM if you wish, not necessary. And you'll get a fact sheet that'll give you possibilities. And once you've chosen the correct possibility, solutions for the problem you have. So see if those things line up with what you see before you. Here is the problem diagnostic tool, the front page. It's going to take you to plant types. So flowers, fruit trees, trees and shrubs, vegetables, and melons. So choose which one is yours. Then when you've chosen fruit trees, nuts, it'll take you to what type of fruit tree or nut do you have. So our problem is with apples. And you can select that. And it'll ask you, okay, what plant parts are affected? And we chose buds, oops, too fast, flowers and blossoms, and shoots, okay? And then it's going to ask you, okay, what type of damage did you find on these different plant parts? The shoots died back, the flowers or blossoms died back, and the flowers or blossoms are discolored. Okay, then we can enter that, say go ahead, and it gives you possibilities. It didn't narrow it down to one thing, So you're going to have to look at these different things and see what matches what you're seeing on your plant. So armillaria root rot, let's say, didn't look like that. We go to fire blight, which is the next thing. And here are some photos they provide you with. Does this look like what you have? We say, yeah, it's got bacterial ooze. It's got things that look like the plant has been burned by a fire. And entire shoots may be affected that way. Okay, so if you go there, you can get an information sheet that describes the disease. Here are the photos again, identifies what it is, what damage it causes, and provides you with management. How do you manage your crop? When do you fertilize? How do you prune? So on and so forth. And what types of things you can apply to the plant, like copper compounds in this particular case, to prevent it from happening in the future. Okay, if that tool did not get where you want to go, again, identify the plant, type UC, followed by the plant name, and you'll get the possibilities and solutions. So here, there are various tools you can use. Garden Answers is an app for your cell phone. Take a picture. Scott Onito from UC Cooperative Extension has a film presentation on this. You can take you through the steps of finding out what your plant is and provide terminology. It's a fairly long one. If you're really interested, that's a good place to go. Plantifier and Flower Checker. So in our case, we chose UC to type in IPM citrus, and we get the citrus management guidelines. We get a sheet of different things. We chose UC IPM citrus pest management guidelines. It goes here. So you have citrus pests in gardens and landscapes. And under that, here are the pests, invertebrates, like insects, diseases. In our particular case, we saw a gumming, a kind of a bleeding on the lower part of the trunk of our citrus tree. This is what we saw, dieback of certain areas of the citrus tree, gumming or resin on the lower part of the trunk typically. So we selected Phytophthora gummosus. So it gives you the symptoms, comments about the disease, management, what you can do culturally to prevent this thing from happening, like don't let sprinklers hit the trunk of your tree, how to monitor, and what treatments you can use. So organically acceptable methods, making decisions when to do control measures. And here are the materials that can be used to control this disease. In order of least harmful to the environment, followed by ones that aren't so unharmful. So why use UC? Is it just because we're part of the University of California and we're kind of conceited, so we only make recommendations based on the University of California? No, not really. UC has information specific to California. It is updated periodically and it eliminates problems not found in California. So you may go to a website and it's meant for the East Coast. The problems are different. The hosts are different. You're going to go down the wrong rabbit hole. And UC also makes recommendations backed up by research. The researchers go out in the field, try these things out, find out if it works, it doesn't work, and find out what problems are out there. You could use other reliable sources, such as various gardening magazines. You'll find out which ones are helpful and which ones provide good information over time. This could verify what the University of California says and maybe add to it in some cases. But be sure these other resources apply to California, and verify diagnosis by comparing several sources. So just in review, the diagnostic procedure, one important thing is keep an open mind. This is scientific skepticism, which can be used by anybody. Gather your information, make observations, describe the environment, lab confirmation if necessary, and pull the information together, make a tentative diagnosis, and confirm by using other sources. And here are the simple tools again, providing instant pain relief, use the IPM's plant problem diagnostic tool. You can type that in, you'll get there. Or the alternative method, which type UC and plant, type the host or plant name. So that's pretty much it, except for a plug for the gardening hotline. So there's the telephone. You can reach us most conveniently by this email address. So mgmastergardenersbutte@ucanr.edu. And that usually finds its way to me, so you know who to blame if the advice is no good. That's the end of my presentation. I hope it didn't confuse you too much, but it provides some exposure to the type of diseases we have in our area and how to use a simple procedure to figure out what you're looking at. Back to Karina.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. That was wonderful. I'm over here taking notes on some of your topics there. Would anyone like to unmute themselves and ask a question?
You're here.
All right, we did have one question.
I can't hear you, Karina. If you're speaking, you're muted.
Sorry. We did have one question that came in on the chat box, and I believe it was answered when you were talking about the environmental aspects. The question is, can you give an example of improper irrigation?
Okay, now generally, depending on the crop, say you have a lawn, which is a no-no, everybody's supposed to be getting rid of their lawns, right? You irrigate to the depth the roots will develop and produce a healthy lawn. That would be about 12 inches. So at one time, you may have to break it up into different intervals within a day so you don't get runoff to get the moisture down to 12 inches. And then when the top 3 inches or so dry out, irrigate again. Not irrigate every day necessarily. That usually wastes water and doesn't encourage the grass or the plant to put its roots deeper in the soil. That can cause rot if you have too much moisture, and especially if you have drainage problems in the type of soil you have. So that's not enough. If you have a sandy soil, you may actually need to go every day with the irrigation, but don't put as much water on at a time because it'll go right through the sand, probably down past the root zone, and you've wasted water. So more frequent irrigation than shallower irrigation. So a lot of those things are examples of proper or improper irrigation. Also, if you have trees, you have sprinklers, don't have your sprinklers hit the lower part of the tree. You're going to wind up with root rot or some other disorder on your tree. The tree should be planted higher than the surrounding ground level by several inches so water will drain away from the tree. And most trees should have a little patch around them where there are no weeds or plants growing right around the trunk. So there are some examples. There are many other examples as well. If you do not irrigate enough, you stress your plants. They wilt. Tomato plants will wilt, but if they recover in the evening, if they perk back up, it's just that it was pretty hot that day. If they're wilted the next morning, you're not irrigating enough.
Okay, and there, oops. Okay, good. My mute button's being odd. Another question came in. Is there anything I can do to yearly recurring aphids, especially in green beans and recurring beetles on spring veggies?
Well, what is the politically correct reply to that statement? Some people like to use forceful streams of water to wash the aphids off. What usually happens is early in the season when the plants are putting a lot of succulent, soft, water-filled tissue, especially roses and things like that. The aphids love to jump on there, and after a while, the plant tissues harden and you can wash the insects off. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. The next tier of things is either an oil or a soap to spray on the insects. The soaps will essentially cause the outer layer of the insect to disorganize and they'll dry out. That needs to be applied directly to the insects. It will not work if it's just on the leaf surface and the insect comes after you spray. And then the third tier might be something like a pesticide that'll kill the insect when it makes contact with the plant. And there are non-systemics in this class, and you can look these things up. If you look for UC aphid control, and it will show you which pesticides there are, which are least harmful to the environment, when to apply them, dangers in applying them. And finally, there are, and this is not encouraged very much, there are systemics for vegetables that will be taken up by the roots and kill insects feeding on the leaves. Imidacloprid is probably the one that still can be used. There is an interval between application and safe harvest, and you have to be careful of that. And some of these pesticides can kill things other than the insects you intend to kill. So you have to be aware of that.
Excellent, thank you. There are no more questions in the chat box. I'd like to invite anyone to unmute themselves for any last questions for Jeff.
Yeah, either I put everybody to sleep or now the entire universe has been solved. I think it's probably the former rather than the latter.
I don't know, I think it's the latter.
Very good presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Would you like to sponsor? No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us for this workshop today. Like I said earlier, this will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel for later viewing, and we will be sending out the evaluations to you as well. Thank you guys. I hope you all have a good day.
Thanks, Karina.
Yeah, and thank you, Jeff, for presenting.